Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Little Bob's Garage. You can see we're outside, it's winter time. Hate working in the garage. Got the boat in the garage right now, which is taking up a lot of space. I'm not going to move it out yet, but what's happened is I've been driving the car yesterday and got a rattle. Something was coming from the dash, but I've noticed also that I have like 2 fingers of clearance here and a little bit more on this side, so that's leading me to conclude I got a broken spring or broken strut. So we're going to pop it up and take a look at this corner and see what we can find out. Not the first time. Pretty bad roads out in this area. So I think the last Jetta I had, I put 4 springs on. Each corner was broken. So let's get it jacked up, take the wheel off, and see what we can find out. It's going to be not a particularly good video because it is cold, and I don't work too well when it gets cold. So let's get started. Well, that didn't take long. Got it laid on there, but you can see broken spring. I was pretty confident that was going to be the issue because it happens a lot in our roads. So that's the rattle, and you can see the boot. You can see the boot's also broken loose as well. Knew that pretty quick. I couldn't get the jack out underneath the car to get it up. I had to actually lift it, so you can tell by where the tires are fitting. So likely means both sides are broken. I'll take a quick peek on the other side, but looks like I'm changing out the springs. Maybe even the struts. Kind of a shame. Got some miles on this car, but didn't think they were wore out anyways. We'll see. I've changed the springs on the struts before. Got the compressor tool for that. See when I get it out and see what shape it's in. Well, I was right. I haven't got the tire off here, but I can feel the broken spring on this side, and it's missing. I don't know if you can see there. That's the end. You can tell clearly by the way it's sitting inside the bottom lip there. So that one's probably flopped up, but that's where all the noise is coming from. So 2 springs, no surprise, both were sitting low. Worst part about this job is changing them out. It's actually really easy. 3 bolts on the top, 2 bolts in the bottom. Mark off the eccentric bolts to do the line as best as possible. But the worst part is getting the alignment afterwards. So I'm going to do a couple tricks to try to set up as best as possible. What this will do is it will affect the camber. I'll show you in this 1 second. Okay, so put the light back on here. There's the broken spring. Won't lift the hood because it's covered in snow. But you have, oh, this is different than my my Mark V. Well, this is a lot better. So what we have is just one compression type connection at the bottom of the strut, so no alignment there. So that must mean that the adjustments are on the don't see it. I'm not 100% sure now. Typically the adjustments were done down here, but I don't see any eccentrics on the lower arm. We'll pull it apart, find out, but that makes it a whole lot easier. That means unbolt the bottom clamp to the bottom of the strut, 3 bolts in the top, the whole assembly comes off, and then we pull out the springs. And that should be all that's necessary for it. I'll give it a bit of a squirt of oil down here as well. You have to look into them. I'm not sure why or where the adjustment is, unless it's up top or unless camber's fixed on this. Might be camber, might be all fixed on this. Anyhow, first step, gotta get the strut out, which in some cases for this means unbolting the axle, and so we can drop the lower arm far enough to get the axle out, or even the lower tire ball joint. We'll see when I get it all out. Well, I had to bring you back because just noticed the top and the bottom are broken. So that explains why this side, don't know if you can see up there, but top of the spring gets a bit smaller in diameter and it sits in that pocket. So both the top and the bottom of the spring are broken. That's pretty impressive. So take it apart. That pinch bolt there, sway bar link here, 3 bolts in the top. Let's see if we can get it out. Well, I got it out. What a job this was. Because the spring broke at the top on this one, I couldn't extend the lower arm far enough to get it out. Compress this up, and my spring compressor wouldn't fit up in the pocket of the strut. And to compound things, I had a few other little problems along the way. This car is only 6 years old, but one of the 3 bolts that hold on the upper bearing came loose. This pulled out of the bottom of the bearing plate here. So that's a bit of a pain in the ass. This has been damaged. The upper bearing has been damaged from the spring breaking. So that took a whole lot longer than I was planning. I think I'm going to wind up having to get a whole new upper bearing now as well. Wasn't counting on that. I get it off, take a closer look. Quite a bit of work. Now, here you can see this is typically what I've had to do in the past. Disconnect the lower ball joint. So there's just 3 bolts down there, take it out. I was trying to get the tie rod in to be able to swing the bottom out to get clearance. Just couldn't get this down low enough. You have to do this anyways to get it out, but with the broken spring going past the upper bearing, had to get even lower. So this was a gun to get out. The front drive shaft, that tie rod in, I couldn't get it loose. Bolt came, or the nut came loose all right, but then the tie rod popped out, and so it just spun. I couldn't get a grip on it. So it's out, but boy, that was a pile of work. So I'm going to work on disassembling this and see if we can save that upper bearing. If not, I'll have to buy another one. I had to work out this. Couldn't get this nut to come off. There's a little hex key in there. So luckily it's not too tight. I was able to hold the socket this way and drive off the nut. This a little awkward, but it's coming. to switch tools because the socket wouldn't reach. 21mm nut, and that's a what is that? I think it's a 6 or 8mm socket. There we go. So here's the other problem. As I said, the seals failed in this. I can clean it up, but I am a little worried. And that used to sit inside there. I think I'm gonna have to buy another one. Not to mention the nut that broke loose. Might be able to tack that in, but I'm feeling there's just too much gone on this now. It was damaged by the spring coming up and down. So that's probably some more to be done. And more money, more money, more money. Okay, it's out. So I didn't bother put everything on time-lapse so you get a bit of an idea, but you can probably see it took a whole lot of time with the top bolts. And this is why these bolts thread into this is the top bearing. So the struts have got a pivot. So inside here is a bit of a taper roller bearing. So these 3 bolts across the top hold it in position. So this car is 2015. So 6 years old, coming on 7 years old. I bought it when I was 3 years old. I am shocked. I've put a rust protecting oil underneath it fairly often. Not often enough, I guess. I had less problem with my last car with 400,000 on it than I did with this one with 280,000 kilometers, which is about just coming up to about 170 miles, 170,000 miles. So this time, I took my time on this time because on the other side, this capture nut broke off. So that's this nut right in here. And that snapped off. I didn't get this top plate. That's another thing. You can get the coil, you can get the strut, you can't get the whole assembly. There's about 120 bucks Canadian per coil, another 20 bucks for the bearing, struts 160 each. The parts are greater than the whole assembly, but you can't get them. I debated for a while just picking the whole assembly. I've done this before, it's a pain in the arse. I'd rather replace the whole assembly because it's just quick and easy. Take the whole assembly out and put it back in. But anyways, I had to be really careful on this one, so I didn't do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to actually try to just tack that back into place while I got it out, so I can hold it in place, pick up another bolt for it. But all I did, just soak it in PBR. And being in the Northeast up here, you just got to go by feel. You're going backwards and forward and backwards and forward and backwards and forward. Feel a bit of resistance, turn it back in. You're basically grinding all the rust out and working your way back and forth. So it's all by feel. Didn't use any at an air ratchet. Didn't use it here because I really had to get a sense of when it's starting to bind, how much force is being applied, so I can just be careful and not snap off the bottom. Now another thing, while I'm on that same topic, a little bit crabby today, because this is taking a lot more effort. The reason, just 1 second. The reason why these things fail is, first of all, we got crap for roads, again, Northeast, nothing but potholes, but this one cracked at the bottom, and you'll notice, and it looks like it's been broken a while, you notice the paint is flaking off the coil here, and up top, it's flaking off there. Well, what happens, is this corrosion takes place on the surface, starts basically creating a stress concentration area. It creates an imperfection in the surface, and that spring, hardened steel spring, which is really brittle, that weakens it, so they snap. So this one snapped at the bottom, the other side snapped at the top. If you look at the other side, this one I found the piece, you can see right where the corrosion was. All that paint had flaked off, started to rust, and that creates an area what's going to corrode. The bottom isn't nearly as bad, but it's topping. So that's the failure for these, is basically they rust out. So the next set, I'm going to do what I always do. Just goop them right up with something like a rust protectant material, like Crown or whatever you use in your area. Soak it right up. This car, like, I do this every year, and it still happened. So pretty frustrated to get that done. Details, I turned the lights around in here, got the car facing the other way just to give myself a bit more room. These I should have taken off, which means taking off the windshield wipers on either side. Didn't, got lazy, lifted, I've cracked either side. Not too bad, just about to here on both sides, lifting it up, trying to be careful. Not terribly upset about that, by the way, chipmunks. So, and then down here, difference on this side than the other side is I left the bolts attached to the top, because what had happened in the bottom is that check and always make sure you don't have strain on your cables. That is, this one is your That's the speed sensing cables. I got to be careful of that. And then the brake. So I put up on a wooden block. Like I said, you take it off the, let me swing the lights around again. So I take, same as I did my Mark V, take the lower ball joint off. That allows it to drop down. Got to drive out the, take off the bolt and drive out the axle shaft. The reason you got to do that is to allow it to be able to droop. This can only extend so far. So everything between the lower ball joint and this, it just binds up so you can't get it down low enough. So I left it attached to the top. You saw with a chisel, I was opening up the pinch connection at the back. You can see that's right here. I was opening it up a little bit here just to allow it to drop out. Tapping on the top of the knuckle came out pretty good. That was okay. The only other big problem I had was the same problem I had on the other side, is these freaking tie rod ends. So what was happening is that the nut for the top tie rod end was spinning. Oh, there you go. There's something I just learned. There looks like there is a Torx end. Shoot. A bit of a Torx, like it's a T. I'll show you that. I didn't see that. So there's another thing. I wish I'd taken a little closer look, because I probably could have saved myself a boot. That is... Oh, it's not here. That's why it's over here. That is these sockets here. So this is a Torx type socket, male, and that, if I had used that on the end of the tie rod end, I would have been able to hold it and then get a bit further. So don't think it did any damage. It was lower about a bottom boot, but I think it's okay. What I wound up doing, again, a trick for rust belt areas, is I just, with my pneumatic wrench, basically just working it back and forth. So with the pneumatic or impact hammer, drive it in so you can hear it tighten up, work it back and forth, sort of jams it all in. But I should have realized that, because this isn't a taper type tie rod end. It's flat. I should have realized. I didn't know that until I got it out. But that would have been a whole lot easier, just to stick that wrench in there and I wouldn't have to deal with it. Pain in the ass, but at least it'll be easier going back together. So check those out. Make sure that boot's okay. Order another, sorry, I said tie rod, this sway bar link. So I was expecting that sway bar link to have that same taper type, but it doesn't. Should have realized that. Should have looked a little bit closer. Should have slowed down. I got to get this all done by tomorrow. And again, I'm going a bit too quick. Anyways, it's apart. Don't think I did too much damage overall. And then next thing I'll do is won't bother showing you that, but using the spring compressor, you get it, just drive it to compress the spring, pull off the end nut, which is also nice and rusty, and then take off top cap, slowly release the tension on the springs, and then it's all ready for the new springs. So that's where we are now. Frankly, a little bit tired with this. I hate rust, and every time I rush, I start making mistakes like that. So I'll bring you back then when I've got the new springs, which are arriving tomorrow. I'll have I got the top bearings in place. They're actually installed already. That's them. That's the springs there. What happened, sits inside there, gets mounted on top of the spring. What happened is this came apart when I pulled it out. So I thought I did that when I was doing it, but I think it's because the spring broke. it was broken on the top. It likely twisted, but you can see it's split all here. So I was planning just to clean that and then reusing it. Then I realized I got this split. Well, I don't want to take any chance any moisture getting in. And I'm going to go at this again. This isn't a terribly hard job to do. If I had a hoist, it'd be a whole lot easier. I'm on my knees. Not that easy for me to get around on. But we're in pretty good shape. Like I said, all this gets put together with the spring in the middle, which I'll show you when I get the parts. And just put it back together. I'll take my time for that. So we'll bring you back when I got all the remainder of the parts, and we'll slowly put it back together and see what we learn along that way as well. Okay guys, I got the springs and I got one back together now. A couple things that I've done here is I've taken all the rust out I can here. Took a wire wheel to it, cleaned it all out. This is, that's just paint from the edge there, but that's from the hook. This is likely an epoxy coating on this, but this is going to cause corrosion between these two metals, and then just the abrasion back and forth is going to wear it off and it's going to rust. So I cleaned it as much as possible to give it a bit of a fighting chance. Got the upper bearing. I just dusted it with a little bit of rust proofing paint as well. There is a top and a bottom. You can see there's a label here with a picture, or with an arrow up showing which is up and down, but it's pretty obvious. This one's broken, but you can see this end here is flat. This, actually I'll grab the other spring for comparisons. So you've got there. You've got basically on the top, the coil flattens up because at the top of the strut is that bearing, which is a flat surface. The bottom, though, is not as much of a flat area. It's much shorter. You can see this almost forms a full ring to go around that flat surface. But here you can see it tapers down, so it doesn't need to be as flat, and it locks into this pocket here. Top doesn't matter, the bottom does. Got to be seated there, and this allows the top, the whole strut, to pivot on there. Like I said, not a whole lot to do with that. Next thing I'm going to be doing, assemble the next one. Now you're dealing with some pretty significant forces, so you have to squeeze it. I basically measured how much I've got to put onto the springs. Force and placement of the compressing tool is pretty important. If you put it here, well, you're clearly going to get it bound up in the top of the spring. So you've got to come back a little bit to put it in. You've got to get as much as you can. Same thing the bottom. You don't want to have it the very bottom coil because you won't be able to get the tool out. So you got to find a good spot. You got to plan it out a little bit. A lot of force. So extremely careful tightening it up. I measured out, assembled the top bearing on top of the strut, get an idea of how much I needed to compress to, which was 10.5 inches. So all I took it down to, I probably could have gone to 11. Took it 10.5 inches and very carefully. This is probably 100, 300, or 200 to 300 pounds per inch of compression, meaning that every inch it gets compacted, there's 200, say for the sake of argument, of compressive force. Maybe it's a bit lower, maybe it's 150. Anyways, there's so for each inch you compress, a couple hundred pounds. Well, if that releases accidentally, that's going to do some serious damage. So take your time. Next thing I'm going to do before reassembling everything is just take a look underneath here for any other problems. This is a bit of a mess, but I'm going to check everything. I'm going to probably give this another little quick coat of some rust preventing oils. And I think for putting it back together, I'm gonna likely do a bit of the opposite. I haven't quite decided. I'm gonna think about it. Either I'm gonna mount it in the knuckle and then put that on the bottom control arm, insert this, and then lift it in position, or I'm either gonna do the opposite of how I take it out. I'm gonna hook it up the top first and then take it out. I'm not sure yet. I'm gonna think about it a little bit, just to figure which is the most maneuverable. More than likely I'll do the top, because that'll get one bolt up there, and that allowed me to sort of lift the knuckle into position. I think it'll be harder to maneuver elsewhere and also keep things high and out of the way. So I think I'll set up a time lapse to put the other strut together, just to get a bit of an idea, and go through it, and then we'll start putting the car back together. So again, I want to show you, this is an unbroken coil, so it's a little bit easier to see. And you can see this end, not very flat, but the top, flat. So that's obviously why it goes to the top. So I started up to put it on time lapse. You can see me putting it all together. And frankly, I was just fiddling with it so much I didn't even bother. But I'll take you through how things went. It was actually a lot of fiddling and a lot of shoving things around, but it wasn't too terribly hard. Just a matter of fitting it back in place. So up top, let me get a light over here. One thing is definitely need to keep garage clean. This is one huge tripping hazard right now. So first thing, I connected up the top of the strut in the first place. I ran iron taps on the top of the bearing and on the bolts just to clean them up, so it wouldn't be an issue for in the future. I hooked up, as I said, the top, and then I thought I could squeeze it all together. So let me get some of this lights off here. And I thought I could squeeze together. That really didn't work. What I did is get the light a bit closer. What I wound up doing was putting a little bit of pressure underneath with a jack, and then tapping the knuckle to fit it up inside. It's just too difficult when it's fully extended and the strut's not right inside the knuckle. You just can't get everything together. The other piece I ran into some difficulties with is the alignment of the axle shaft and the hub. It was a little cocked, and I didn't quite realize it at first. I thought it just slipped in pretty easy. But anyways, as I fiddled with it a bit, couldn't get the hub to go back. Once I figured that out, just got behind, and it just had to rock the CV joint on the end of the axle, and it popped right in, and then after that everything was straightforward. So put the upper sway bar link, attached it, and just to correct myself, this is a double square, an M6 double square, and that's what I was using on the end of the sway bar link to hold it in place so I touched the bolt. So kind of wish I would have known that, or remembered that, when I took it apart. It's the exact same with my Mark V Jetta I had. Completely forgot about that. I remember it now because I wound up sticking a hex head in one of those and damaging it. So anyways, it's a double square, what it's called, and tighten that up, tighten the pinch bolt, tighten the 3 bolts that hold the lower ball joint. Just going to go double check that everything else is put together okay. I still have to torque this, fair bit of torque on that. I'm not intending on torquing as much as possible. I really don't know why they do that. But I will put it down, a good 100, 120 pounds. I think it's like 160, 180 foot-pounds. It's actually a bit of a torque to yield. I'm not doing that. Especially, you can't torque to yield a bolt like that a second time. So I'm just going to, like I said, run it to 100, 120, and that's it. And I think that's what I did last time. The upper boot still isn't in. I'm going to wait for it to get a bit of weight on it so I can set it back in place. Pretty straightforward from that perspective, and I think that's it. There wasn't a whole lot that had to be disconnected to do this. So biggest problem for me was that my knees are getting pretty darn sore. I wish I had this car just a bit higher. Would have made this job a whole lot easier. On the other side, I don't know if I'll bother filling it. I'll probably just show at the beginning. I tacked that captured nut in the top bearing. Just a couple of little tacks just to hold in position. It pretty much had to be pressed in the first place, so it should hold pretty well. And yes, I know my brakes are no good. It's actually the interesting part about it, the sad thing is it's northeast. It's actually rust. Rust that builds up where it's down. You got bare surface there. This is all rust. I still got half the pad left and planning to do it. Brakes just don't last long here, and it's because of corrosion. And this car gets a lot of mileage, but it's all highway, so don't really apply the brakes a whole lot. But my wife's car, which only goes 5 miles to work, stop and go, her brakes are pristine shape. This one 250,000 kilometers, and you can see they're just getting the mess. I can't complain too much. 250,000 kilometers. That's the original set. The back's been replaced, same issue, corrosion, but I'll get to that in the next video as well. So again, I'm going to bring you back when I've got the other side. I'll let you know if I ran into any problems with that. Well, I got the other side done. It actually went better. Difference was when I was trying to put the knuckle back into the bottom of the strut. What I did this time is I put the jack underneath the ball joint, And again, same thing, tap it into position, take up the slack, and turn the knuckle, I guess turning away to the right, I guess, in the car, or away from the front. And that allowed me to get the axle shaft in a whole lot easier, and so a whole lot less fiddling around. So it went pretty well. So the job's all done. I got all the tools cleaned up and put away. Just got a few more things I gotta wipe off a little bit before I get it done. You can see the springs here. The broken spring, the top bearings. Yeah, funny, strange having one breaking one end and one breaking a different end. But again, very similar to the Mark V I did. I had to replace all 4 corners in it for the exact same reason. This one, it was generally okay, just found a little bit more frustrating to get around and get all the parts put back together. You know, lessons learned, I forgot about those double square ends on the sway bar connections. Would have made my life a little bit easier. And what I found when I did the passenger side was that jacking up in the ball joint to lift the knuckle to fit things in place kept the center of gravity right underneath the middle of the knuckle, so it went really well. So I guess in terms of the job complexity, probably still give it about a 4 out of 10. This one's actually simpler than the Mercedes I did a few months back. It's, you know, fewer parts you have to disconnect. It's a little bit easier to do, but it's a little harder to get the parts put together. So though fewer things have to be removed, you're having to sort of force the parts back into place, whereas the Mercedes, when I disconnected all the links, and again, it was a rear, quite a bit of difference in the rear, even though it is 4-wheel drive, it was quite a bit easier just to drop it down. In terms of tools, probably give this a 5 out of 10. Quite a few different types of sockets, metrics, the double square, 2 different sizes they had to use, spring compressor. So you need a variety. I had to use impacts every now and then. I could have got away without that, but it did speed things up. Certainly need torque wrenches for both the lug nuts, for all the wheel fasteners, and for that axle bolt. So I think about a 5. It is a little, had to use more tools. The Mercedes one probably only had about 3 or 4 different sizes, and it was all apart, so more straightforward that way. But again, this one was probably, from a perspective of danger, worse than the Mercedes. You know, using a spring compressor tool, got to be very careful with that. A lot of stored energy. Certainly if you don't have the spring compressor nice and square in the spring, or squarely compressed, there's a lot of energy. So definitely more dangerous than the rear spring of the Mercedes. You know, changing a coil out on a strut is, you know, a little bit more, because you have to compress the spring, more dangerous. If I was to make recommendations, buy the whole assembly. Buy the strut, the spring, the top bearing as a package, and just replace the whole assembly. I couldn't get it, so I had to do it this way, but I think you'd be better off. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you learned a little bit about this job. Hope it helps you a little bit. And again, hit the subscribe button. If you have any comments, hopefully I can answer them for you. But thanks for watching.